Hey guys, my name's Nick and welcome back to the channel, and in this video we're going to be discussing the brand new Thousand Sons Codex, and more specifically what's changed between this and the old index edition that we've had to put up with for the last, since the game of 8th edition launch really. So I've made all my notes exactly the same as I did with my Tzeentch video, where I was comparing the Codex Demon Tzeentch entries against the index entries only. And I'm going to be doing the same here. I'm not going to be covering the standard Chaos Codex unit, so things like Predators and Defilers and Hellbrutes, stuff like that, I'm not going to be covering. What I am going to be covering is the specific entries that were in the index for Tzeentch, or for Tzeentch Heretic Astartes, and then comparing those to the entries that are in here, seeing who the movers and shakers are, and all the good new powers that they have access to. Very exciting review. Let's get straight into it. Now, exactly the same as the Tzeentch Demon review that I did, the Codex review for that, I will be referring to notes and the book, so forgive me for not maintaining 100% eye contact with you, my wonderful audience out there via the webcam. And I have sort of spent about an hour or so just going through every single entry and trying to work out what's changed. Now, I did make a mistake, quite a big mistake, which was picked up in my comments of the Tzeentch Demons, and that was Flamers actually going from 8 inches range to 12 inch range, which was a pretty big one, but I think I picked everything else up, so it looks like just that one thing that I didn't pick up, but hopefully we're going to be okay with this one. So the first thing we need to look at is what happens if you get a battle-forged army. That is, everything fits in the Codex and you've got no other units and you're fully battle-forged. First thing, as with every other unit or every other army that's having its own Codex, you're now getting basically the old objective secured trait, which means that your troops will score the objective even if the enemy outnumbers you. So because you're a troops unit, you get that ability, unless they also have that ability, and then it does come down to pure numbers. So everyone gets that, so no change there. The big one though for the Thousand Sons is the increase in psychic range. All powers have an extra 6 inches of range. So those that are using Smite at 18 inches now have a 24 inch Smite. And all the other little cool rules and abilities that will come within the psychic powers, which we'll get to in a second, all have that extra 6 inch range. That is pretty big, especially considering that Thousand Sons armies, if you're rubric heavy and you're taking a lot of Heretic Astartes Tzeentch guys, you're going to be quite number deficient. So being able to put your powers across the battlefield with that extra bit of range is definitely going to help you win your battles. So we have a number of Warlord traits, obviously, that is standard with all new codexes. And just to summarise the different Warlord traits we have the first one, which allows you to re-roll any Deny the Witch for your Warlord, so he gets to have a little re-roll on that. He can also reduce all incoming damage to him by a factor of 1, so if you're hit by an autocannon with a damage 2 profile, you're reducing that incoming damage just to 1 should it get through your armour and invulnerable save. The next one is that you can advance and charge in the same turn, and you get to re-roll those charges. That's quite an interesting one. Tzeentch armies are typically not that assaulty based, but there could be some good uses there if you've got a exalted sorcerer, for example, riding a disc and he's got some other stuff with him. That could be quite cool. Next one is to know an extra psychic power. So if your Warlord has a couple of powers, you get this ability to have a third power. Now that's quite good. Tzeentch armies should have lots of powers, so that's quite a useful one to pick from. Then have the ability to increase your invulnerable save by a factor of 1 to a maximum of 3 up. And then finally you can add +1 to your psychic tests for your Warlord. Again, another good psychic buff for a Tzeentch army. So some pretty good ones, mostly psychic focused, which is good, as it should be. Now before you start running away and thinking, you know what, Magnus is going to be an absolute badass if I start piling some of these on, named characters cannot take any of the powers they want to choose from, any of the traits they want to use from. So Ahriman has a fixed ability. His one is to increase his invulnerable save. So if he's your Warlord, he gains +1 to his invulnerable save, gives him a 3 up because he comes with a 4+. And then Magnus's fixed one, if he's your Warlord, is to gain 1 extra power. Now that's not a bad deal actually. Okay, Magnus is a pretty big fire magnet to be honest, but if he's now casting 4 powers a turn and he has access to a few more good tricks this time round, that's not a bad deal to take actually. So of all the ones in there, to be honest, if I was running Magnus as my Warlord, I'd probably pick that one anyway. So let's talk psychic powers then. Psychic powers, the Thousand Sons have access to 3 disciplines, not just one. they have access to 3. First one being the Dark Hereticus powers straight from the Chaos Codex, Chaos Space Marine Codex. They have the same standard powers straight from there. Second one, they have all the powers straight from the Tzeentch Demon entry in the Codex Demons. So that's 2 sets of powers they can pick from. Then they also finally have their own set of powers that are unique to the army. And that set of powers is known as the Discipline of Change. Now I'm going to read the excerpt from the Discipline of Change for you. So the first one is Tzeentch's Firestorm. It says Warp Charge of 7. If manifested, an enemy unit with 18, which could be 24 because of the extra powers for being a Battleforged Thousand Sons army. An enemy unit within 18, potentially 24, and visible, roll 9 dice. Any 6s, that unit suffers a mortal wound. Pretty tasty. Second one then is Boon of Mutation, which has a warp charge of 7 again. If manifested, select an enemy. If manifested, select a friendly Thousand Sons character, but not a demon character, so your Tzeentch Demon Prince or Magnus. Within 3 inches of the Psyker, roll 2d6 and consult the Boon of Change stratagem to see what effect that power has on the character for the rest of the game. Now, if we go to that boon table, there are a number of interesting mutations, really, that can affect your character. The first one being on a 2d6 roll of 2 is Spawndom. Your character is killed, and then you replace him with a Chaos Spawn. You know that, I think we've seen that before. On the roll of a 3, Arcane Oculum. Add 6 inches to the range of all the character's shooting weapons. Could be quite interesting. Bear in mind that this is the kind of list that you can't pick and choose from. Like Warlord traits and Psychic powers where we can now pick and choose. This one is completely random. On a 4, Temporal Distortion. Add 3 inches to the character's move characteristic. Cool. 5, a Prescient Foresight. Each time the character loses a wound, roll a d6. On a 6, they don't lose the wound. If the character already has an ability with a similar effect, add 1 to the dice rolls you make to avoid losing wounds. So very similar to sort of the Nurgle Disgustingly Resilient. They get a 5+, ignore wounds. This gives you a 6 up, potentially can stack. On a 6, Esoteric Insight. Add 1 to any psychic tests you take for the character. That's pretty good. 7, the Eye Opens. Choose a boon of your choice, but you can't choose Spawndom and number 12, which is Demonhood. We'll get to that one in a second. So basically you can't pick the worst or the best. Although going to a spawn isn't actually that bad, especially if your character is pretty weak already on wounds. On an 8, Aura of Illusion. Subtract 1 from hit rolls that target the character in the fight phase. Yeah. 9, Ether Flame. Add 1 to the damage characteristic of the character's melee weapons. 10, Crystalline Body. Add 1 to the character's toughness characteristic. 11, Fragment of Immortality. Add 1 to the character's wound characteristic. And 12, Demonhood. Your character is slain, however, before removing the model as your casualty, you can add a Demon Prince of Tzeentch to your army and set him up within 6 inches of the character before removing him. So some very random but some very powerful powers in there. I always find, though, I don't know if anyone else finds this, but when you've got such random abilities and that scenario appears in a game occasionally, you completely forget what they are. And then you end up either missing out on the on silly little things like the +1 to characteristics and stuff, and then yeah, you end up missing it. But one of those things. Maybe it's just me. I don't know. Anyway, let's move back to the Discipline of Change. Discipline of Change, Glamour of Tzeentch, which is the power number 3. Warp charge of 7. If manifested, a friendly Thousand Sons unit within 12, potentially 18 of the Psyker. Until the start of your next phase, your opponent subtract 1 from any to hit rolls. That straight away sticks out as a superb ability. A warp charge of 7. Given some of the characters have buffs and some of the stratagems can give buffs, you can almost guarantee getting that power off. And anything that involves modifying enemies' dice rolls in a negative way in 8th edition is very welcome. So that is definitely something to sit there on your psychic power list within your army straight away. Option number 4 is Doombolt. Doombolt's a warp charge of 9, so it's quite a hard one to get off. It's only going to be your big characters with all the super buffs like Magnus and Araman that should be trying to get this one away. If manifested, an enemy unit within 18 or 24 of the Psyker and visible to him, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds and in their following movement phase must half their move characteristic and they cannot advance. That seems pretty good to me. But warp charge 9 As we know, 2d6 average is 7, so unless your character has a +1 or 2 modifier, that's quite a difficult one to rely on. Fifth one then is Temporal Manipulation. Has a warp charge of 6, so a pretty easy one to get off. If manifested, select a friendly Thousand Sons model within 12 of the Psyker, or 18. That model immediately heals D3 wounds, so a good character regen ability. And it doesn't say that it doesn't ignore vehicles, so you can target that one against vehicles as well. And finally, the Weaver of Fates. Now this makes a return from the index. Weaver of Fates is a warp charge of 6. If manifested, a friendly Thousand Sons unit within 18 of the Psyker, or 24. Until the start of your next psychic phase, the invulnerable save is improved by 1 to a maximum of 3 up. Very, very good, very powerful rule. I've used that a number of times in the index playing Thousand Sons. Really, really like that rule. And models that don't have an invulnerable save, like Zangors for example, and some of your weaker little chaff units, you can give them a 5+ invulnerable save. So if they've got nothing, they gain basically +2 to an invulnerable save and go from 0 to 5+. Everything else gains a point. It's an easy one to cast. I really like Weaver of Fates. I was definitely using that a lot, especially for Magnus, who only has a 4+ invulnerable save. Giving him a 3 was definitely life-saving for him. So that covers the psychic powers section. And we also have a bunch of useful stratagems as well. So there's some that affect vehicles. I'm not going to cover those. I'm trying to pick the more specific Thousand Sons really cool ones that really stand out straight away, rather than just read the whole lot. So the first one is the Great Sorcerer. It means for 1 command point, your sorcerer can cast an extra power. If you stack that with that Warlord trait, where he's already got an extra power, yeah, you can be casting a lot of powers, which is right and fitting. 3 command points, this is quite a powerful ability, the Coruscating Beam. So you pick a point on the battlefield that you can see, and then you draw a line 9 inches away from that point that you can see. Doesn't mention having to be able to draw a line of sight between those 2 points. You can pick a point here and a point here, that gap's 9 inches. 1 millimeter line, every unit underneath that on a 4+ will suffer D3 mortal wounds. Now, for a character, they're less likely to be hit, so it's a 5+ for hit a character. But everyone underneath that line will suffer D3 mortal wounds. Can only be used once per battle. It is quite an expensive command point usage, but could swing a game here and there, I think. For 1 command point, we get Kabbalistic Focus. Now that gives you +2 to a psychic cast if there are 2 other psychers within 6 inches of you. So Thousand Sons being psychic heavy, and all your infantry and your Terminators and so on, they've all got psychers in there, so you can easily stack up quite a number of psychers, and if you position them right on the battlefield, should be easily able to get this +2 off. Now I did mention that 9+ warp charge value power earlier. This is another good way of trying to get nearer that target. So anything with a really high value, these kind of modifiers are very useful. What's been seen in other codexes as well is similar abilities to this. This is basically a webway strike, so for 1 command point you can place a unit in the web, and he can just come in and deep strike 9 inches away. For 3 points you can do that with an extra unit. So that's something that is appearing in a lot of different codexes. Similar abilities but with slightly different names for the same points cost or command point cost. Very useful ability, especially with slow moving Thousand Sons units, which are, because they're all made of dust, encased in armour, they are pretty slow. So being able to drop these guys in a little bit more controlled, a little bit further up the battlefield is definitely good. And if you can combine that with things like warp time, which I have covered in previous videos, where you get that extra free movement in the psychic phase, yeah, definitely something worth considering. Another ability then from 1 command point is Soul Flare. So basically your aspiring sorcerers in your Scarab unit or your Rubric Marine unit, when they die, set out a big flamey mouth kind of Soul Flare. Just think Indiana Jones in Temple of Doom, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Think of that when he all goes mad, and yeah, that kind of power starts killing people around him. So basically any units that are around that guy when he dies, within 3 inches of the unit, on a 4+, they take a mortal wound. If they're a character, it's -2 to try and do that damage, so on a 6+, the same as a vehicle as well. So yeah, pretty effective self-defense, self-destruct mechanism. Another one I really like is the Vengeance of Prospero. Now this targets only Space Wolf models, so if you're into the background, going back to the Horus Heresy, where the Thousand Sons were besieged on their planet of Prospero, by the Space Wolves, and in fact led by the Sisters of Silence and the Legio Custodes as well, who sort of picked up and attached themselves to all the different hunting packs of the Space Wolves in order to shield them from all that psychic might of the Thousand Sons. This basically increases your key ability as a Chaos Marine, which is the Death of the False Emperor rule, where on 6s in combat you get an extra attack against Space Wolves. For this extra command point, it's a 4+ to get the extra attack. Now, Space Wolves have a bucket of attacks anyway, so. And how many times do you play Space Wolves? Well, could be a fun narrative thing to come out of a game between you and your friends, but the reality is, in a tournament or anything where these kind of things could really matter, probably not a big impact, but it's nice to see it in there from a real good background and fluff perspective. As with other codexes, we have access to relics, in which case are called Sorcerous Arcana. And there's a couple that really spring to mind straight out of the book here. First one is the Dark Matter Crystal. This allows you to remove an infantry unit from the battlefield and then place it as if it's just deep struck in 9 inches away. So if they're bogged down in some combat you know they're not going to do particularly well at, you can just go, you know what, they're getting the hell out of dodge, and then you just move them somewhere else. So pretty good if they're trapped in a combat, for example, and you want to get them away. The other really good one is Helm of the Third Eye. Now this is a stratagem or a command point regen ability. Every time your opponent uses a command point on a 5+, you get a new command point. So the ability to stack some of your stratagems and so on and get some free command points on a 1 in 3 dice roll, that's not a bad ability. So certainly one to really consider, especially if your enemy has a lot of command points and you see them bring that massive, battalion or brigade scale army, and they go, you look at me, I've got 58 command points, and you go, every time you use one, I'm probably going to get one back. So and it doesn't say there's a limit on that, you just keep generating them on a 5+. So something to really consider, as some of the stratagems for Thousand Sons are really cool. So let's move into the unit changes then. So we're going to start with the characters and move through the troops and so on, and just remember I'm focusing only on the Thousand Sons specifics, not the Hellbrutes, the Rhinos, the Predators, the Helldrakes, all that kind of stuff, just the Thousand Sons cool stuff. So let's start with Ahriman himself. So he is power level 7, he was power level 8, so he actually drops a power level. So if you're interested in the narrative style and you build your games around power level, he is now a point cheaper. His stat line remains the same, his points remain the same, even if he's on a disc. No real difference there. Actually, my apologies, if he's on a disc, he's +2 power level, so he does go up power level if he's on a disc. I don't think he did if he was in the index, it was just kind of a freebie, but the points remain the same. So if you're more interested in match play, he still remains at the same points, including his war gear. All his weapon options also remain the same, so there's no stat changes or range changes to any of his weapons, like the Black Staff and so on. That all stays the same. There's a little bit of a movement of a rule as well. So under the Psyker section before, he was gaining +1 to Psychic tests and Deny the Witch. That's just now moved around. It's got its own rule name now, which is Arch Sorcerer of Tzeentch. So no real change. It's just repositioned within the data slate entry for Ahriman. So what's changed with the Lord of the Thousand Sons rule? Now this is a generic ability across multiple units, multiple characters within the Thousand Sons. Previously it allowed you to re-roll an invulnerable save throw of a 1. Now Thousand Sons have a lot of invulnerable saves. That's what keeps them going because they're all made of dust. If you rolled a 1 on that invulnerable save, you got to re-roll it if you were within range of a unit with this ability, which was quite a few units, including Magnus as well as Ahriman and Exalted Sorcerers. That ability's now changed. You don't get that re-roll on the invuln save. What you do get is a re-roll of 1s in the to hit. So that's both in melee and ranged shooting. It's quite a common ability. A lot of army commanders in many codexes have this ability to re-roll those 1s. That's now kind of filtered down to Thousand Sons. I'm a bit disappointed by that one, to be honest. I won't make any bones about that. The ability to re-roll those invuln saves when you've got such few units anyway kind of kept you alive and in the game. But there we go. That's the rule that's changed. Let's move into the big boy, the Primarch of the Thousand Sons, Magnus the Red. What's changed with him? The first thing we notice with Magnus the Red is his power level has increased. He was 21, he is now power level 23. And also his points have gone up by 30. He was 415, he's now 445 points. No change to his profiles, his stat profile, that's all remained the same. However, what I was hoping, which came out of the Demon Codex, was his ability to shrug off perils of the warp. So basically he now has a 2-up save if he suffers a wound from perils. So he's casting a lot of powers. He could potentially be casting 5 powers a turn. And if you get any of those double 1s and double 6s, yeah, he's going to be suffering a lot of damage on himself. He now has a 2-up to ignore that. That is superb, and that was exactly what I was hoping would come out when I did the Demon Codex of Tzeentch review. So I'm glad that is now in. Another minor change is the Gaze of Magnus. So when he's smiting, he does d6 damage, but if he's used to smite on a 10 on your dice roll, bear in mind he already has a +2 bonus to that, so on an 8+, he used to get 2d6 mortal wounds when he's smited. That's minorly increased. You now need an 11, or if he's fully charged, you know you need a 9 because he's got the +2 bonus. Yeah, he's got a slight change to his getting that big smite off, the 2d6 smite. He also has exactly the same change for Primarch of the for Arch Sorcerer of Tzeentch. This is now Primarch of Thousand Sons. He can still re-roll those hits of 1. That's different, and he gains a re-roll of any 1 in a psychic test for friendly Thousand Sons as well. So he's gaining a little bit of a psychic bonus, but he does lose that re-roll of a 1 to invulnerable saves, the same as Ahriman. So this is a very similar rule to Ahriman, but that also has the re-roll of 1s in psychic tests, which is quite good when you're trying to get those powers off and you roll up that dirty little 1 on your dice. He also gains access to all 3 of those psychic power disciplines, the same as Ahriman. Let's move into the Exalted Sorcerers then. So they're still power level of 7, so that's unchanged. If their stat line is exactly the same as well. Their points have gone up though. They were 86, they're now 112. And on a disc they were 120, they're now 132, so there's a bit of a points increase for these guys. They have gained access to plasma pistols though, which they didn't have before. The warp flame pistol and the power swords. They've gained access to a couple of new bits of gear. If they're riding a disc, it's +1 to your power level. The Lord of the Thousand Sons change, which I mentioned for Ahriman, is on these guys, so that's not the reroll to the invulnerable save, it is now reroll of 1s to hit. And these guys gain access to 2 of the psychic disciplines. They gain Discipline of Change and Dark Hereticus. So they don't get the Codex Demons entry, they get the new one for Thousand Sons, and they get the one from the Codex Space Marines, Chaos Codex Space Marines. So we still get regular Sorcerers. Sorcerers are now power level 6, they were power level 7, so they've dropped in power level. They gained in 5 points, but they do gain access to the Warp Flame Pistol, which they didn't have before. They have lost access to combi weapons. They've lost access to jump packs. They can't even take a disc of Tzeentch. They can't even get any speed increase. But they have, what I can tell, gained a 5+ invulnerable save. So the lesser sorcerers, not convinced. Without being on a disc or some of those added extras they used to have, not so good anymore. Let's move on then to Sorcerers in Terminator armour. So this was a unit that you could pick from the Codex before, from the Index before, but there's a few changes here as well. So the first thing we notice is that the power level and the stats all remain the same. They have dropped by 20 points. They were 140, they're now 120. That's definitely a positive. They have gained access to the Inferno Combi Bolter, which they didn't have before, but they lose access to other combi options. So things like the Melter and the Flamer they don't have. They do have access to that combi Inferno Bolter, so the -2 AP bolt gun shots. They have also lost access to the Force Axe. They have gained access to a Familiar though, so for 9 points you now get +1 to the first psychic test in any psychic phase. So potentially for 5, 6 or 7 turns you've now got extra +1 to that casting roll in the first phase. So you want to make sure that you pick your powers in the right order if you're using a Familiar with your Terminator Sorcerer. He has access to 2 disciplines. He has the Discipline of Change and the Dark Hereticus. Doesn't have access to all 3 powers. He's only a master of 2. Let's move into the troops choices then, and the Rubric Marines, the mainstay of a Thousand Sons army. They were power level 8, but they're now power level 7, so they've dropped 1 just for the basic 5 Marines. However, when you start adding in the extra models, you can have extra 5 to make a unit of 10, an extra 10 to make a unit of 15, extra 15 to make a unit of 20, they now become a little bit more expensive. So for 10, that's 14 power level. That's an equivalent as before, as it's a different split. Instead of power level 7 plus an extra power level of 7, it was 8 and 6. So it's still 14, mathematically speaking. But when we go to a unit of 15, that's now a power level of 21, not 20. And if you go for a unit of 20, that's power level of 27, not power level 26. So a little bit more expensive the more you take when it comes to power level. However, points-wise, they have changed. So the sorcerers, the aspiring sorcerers in a unit used to be 30 points. They're now a flat points cost of 18, the same as all the other Marines in the unit. So your characters, your leaders of those units, are not costing you any more points. Stat lines have remained unchanged as well, so they've still got the same stat lines. However, the aspiring sorcerer has gained access to a plasma pistol, which he couldn't do before, but he has lost access to a force axe and a force sword. He just remains with his power stave. The Zangors, so the little bird-like creatures that are sort of a cheap troops option for the Thousand Sons units, their power level and their points still remain the same, power level of 4 and 7 points. They do have an instrument of chaos that has renamed itself to the Brayhorn. Still has the same net effect though, which is +1 distance to your advance and to your charge move. So they've got a little bit of extra there. What we do gain access to is a new unit, which is the Zangor Shaman at a power level of 5. Now let's take a look at the Zangor Shaman. Now, as you expect, he is going to be buffing Zangors. So he has a move of 12, so he's a bit nippy on his feet. Bear in mind that a regular Zangor has a move of 6. He is quite quick. Weapon skill 3+, ballistic skill 3+, strength, toughness and wounds of 4, 3 attacks, a leadership of 8 and a save of 6 up. He's armed with a force stave and he rides atop a disc of Tzeentch. Now that's why he's got that extra movement. And that disc can attack with its blades as well, same as any other disc. A strength of 4, AP 0 and 1 damage. And he comes with the force stave, which is the same as every other force stave weapon. +2 strength, -1 AP and D3 points of damage. He has several abilities. The Aura of Dark Glory, it gives him a 5-up invuln save. Bestial Prophet, which is add 1 to any hit rolls you make for friendly Zangor units within 6. So that's his big buff to Zangor units. Zangors at the moment have a weapon skill of 3+. They're now actually going to be hitting on 2s, so that's quite effective in combat. He also has Sorcerer's Elixir. You can re-roll the first failed psychic test you make for this model and can only be used once per battle, so a limited little bit of a bonus there. He can attempt and deny 1 psychic power each phase. He knows Smite, which is standard, and he has faction keywords of Chaos Tzeentch, Heretic Astartes, Thousand Sons, and keywords Character, Cavalry, Demon, Zangor, Flyer, Psyker, and Shaman. So, yeah, one good thing to notice about the Zangors is they do have the Heretic Astartes ability, or keyword. There's a number of powers and stratagems that affect Heretic Astartes, so you need to be aware and remember that Zangors have that keyword. While we're talking Zangors then, let's talk about another unit, which is the Zangor Enlightened. Now these weren't in the index either, so these guys are basically riding discs. So they all have a 12-inch move, same stat lines as before, but with 2 wounds. So they have a 3-up weapon skill, 3+ ballistic skill, strength and toughness of 4, 2 wounds as I said, 2 attacks, leadership of 7, and the leader basically has an extra attack and an extra point of leadership. So it's a unit of 3 for their base cost of 3 power level, and you can include up to 6 additional guys in total. As I said, they all ride discs, so they're quite a good little fast attack option here for a relatively low power level. Well, these guys have options of auto pistols, Fate Caster Great Bows, which are a range 24, assault 2, strength 5, AP -1 shooty weapon, chainswords, and divining spears. Now, divining spears is a melee weapon, +1 strength, that gives him strength 5 with an AP -1 and 1 damage. And that damage is increased to 2 on a turn in which they charge. So if you can get that charge off, which is quite likely with a 12-inch move, they could be quite tasty. They can replace that divining spear with the chainsword and auto pistol or the Fate Caster Great Bow. So they come with that spear as default. Have a 5+ invuln save, and they also have a Guided by Fate, which each time you make it to hit roll of a 6+ for that model, except for the disc's blades itself. Do not make a wound roll for that attack, it automatically wounds. Saving throws can be attempted against attacks as normal. So yeah, 6+ auto hitting. Yeah, that's quite useful, I think. Other than that, they have the same sort of faction keywords as other Zangors, and because they're on a disc, they have that fly word as well. Finally, we move into the Scarab Occult Terminators. Now, they have dropped in power level. They were 13, they're now 11. And subsequent, if you go up to 10 models in a unit, that's now power level 22 and not 24. So they're a little bit cheaper to take the Elite Scarab Terminators. And as with the Rubric Marines, the Sorcerers are now basically a free include. They used to be 50 points for the Sorcerer and 33 for the other Scarab Occult. They're now all a flat 33 points. No other stat changes or anything else that creeps into there, so that's pretty good. They just come down in those little bit of points cost, enabling you to squeeze in other units or balance against some of the other points increases for people like Magnus. The other final new unit that we get access to is the Mutalith Vortex Beast. Now, I'm not an Age of Sigmar player, but I believe that this does come from the Mortal Realms of Age of Sigmar. Power level of 8 for the Mutalith Vortex Beast. He has a move of star, because that's a variable characteristic. Weapon skill of 4+, ballistic skill 4+, strength 7, toughness 7, 14 wounds. Attacks a variable, leadership of 7, and a 4+ save. So let's talk about his movement and his attacks. Remaining wounds 8 to 14. He has a move of 8, 4 attacks, and a vortex power of 2+, which we'll get to in a second. 4 to 7, move of 6, 3 attacks, and a 3+ to the vortex power. And remaining wounds 1 to 3, he's down to just 4 inches of movement with 2 attacks and a 4+ vortex power. Has a 5+ invuln save for his Aura of Dark Glory. Mutant regen at the beginning of each turn, he gains 1 wound, so that's very similar to some of the other rules within some of the demon vehicles. And he comes with a Potentacled Maul, which is a melee weapon, user strength and -1 AP and 1 damage. Make 3 hit rolls for each attack made with this weapon instead of 1. So it's a multi-hitting, very similar to some of the Defiler attacks when it's got those tentacles on it. It's also got an enormous claws ability, which is strength user, AP -2, and does 2 damage. So you can switch between those two types of attack, or multi-attack with several different options, and split those attacks across those two types of melee weapon. Let's talk about the Warp Vortex then. At the start of each of your shooting phases, you may have this model attempt to use a single Mutalith Vortex power of your choice from the table below. Alternatively, you may randomly determine the power by rolling a d6, but who randomly determines when you don't have to, eh? Nobody does that. And consult the table. If you do so, you may attempt a second randomly determined power immediately after resolving the first. Okay. So if you're going to be fickle and rely on the powers of fate, you get a bit of a bonus. Each time the model attempts to use one of its powers, roll a d6 to see if it's successful. If the result is equal to or greater than the vortex power characteristic, then the power takes effect. Otherwise, the attempt to use the power fails and nothing happens. So as we said on his profile, his damage profile, he starts off with a 2+ ability to get the power, and that drops as it goes down through the damage to eventually being a 50-50 4+. So let's have a look at the Mutalith Vortex powers. A d6 roll of 1 gives you Warp Flare. Each enemy unit within 9 inches of the Mutalith Vortex Beast immediately suffers a mortal wound. Interesting. On a 2, Chaotic Infusion. Pick a Tzeentch unit from your army within 9. Add 1 to that unit's strength characteristic to the end of the turn. On a 3, you get Temporal Flux. Pick a Tzeentch unit from your army within 9 of the Mutalith Vortex Beast. You can re-roll failed charge rolls for that unit this turn. If the unit is already within 1 inch of an enemy unit, so pretty much engaged in combat, they fight first in the fight phase as if they had charged. That could be quite useful. On a 4, Ephemeral Touch. Pick a Tzeentch unit from your army within 9 of the Vortex Beast. Improve the AP of all melee weapons wielded by 1 until the end of the turn. So if it's an AP 0, it becomes AP -1 a melee weapon, and subsequent boosts. That's quite cool. On a 5, Maelstrom of Madness. Pick an enemy unit within 9, reduce its leadership characteristic by 1 until the end of the turn. And it is cumulative with other uses of this power, so it does stack, but to a maximum of -3. Now bear in mind how lethal failed leadership rolls can be to the enemy. Stacking things like that can be quite fun. And finally, a Beam of Unreality. Roll 3 dice. And for each roll of a 4+, the closest enemy unit within 18 inches of the vortex beast and visible to the model immediately suffers a mortal wound. So, yeah, that's lots of mortal wounds being kicked out by this guy. And remember, he can form part of your battle-forged army, so some of these ranges will increase by 6 inches. He also has unstable energies. If this model has 7 or fewer wounds remaining at the start of your shooting phase, the ranges of the vortex powers are doubled. However, it will suffer a mortal wound if you roll a 1 when the model attempts to use a power. So some pluses and minuses in there straight away, that those ranges can be quite nasty, but you can potentially damage yourself. So he is a little bit unstable. Finally, warp implosion. If the model is killed and reduced to 0 wounds, roll a d6 before removing the model from the battlefield. On a 6, those nearby units are damaged by searing warp fire as the vortex collapses in on itself, and each unit within 6 suffers d6 mortal wounds. So very similar to a lot of vehicle explosions. This crazy character can do some weird stuff when he dies. Faction keywords of Chaos Tzeentch, Heretic Astartes and Thousand Sons, and keywords of Monster and Mutalith Vortex Beast. It's 150 points for that model. So quite reasonably priced, but quite sporadic in its use. It could be a little bit random, which is part of the, the fickleness of Tzeentch. So I think it fits quite fluffily into one of these kind of armies, especially if you're playing narrative and you've got some weird choices and you're going with the fickle fingers of fate and relying on Tzeentch to bless you with some good dice rolls and some good abilities. And with that, we are done with the review of the Thousand Sons Codex. Now, there's a lot of information in there. I do appreciate that you may want to pause and rewind some of this just to catch anything that I may have said a little bit too quickly, and just go back to those important bits if it fits your particular army. I'm so far 70-30 impressed with the changes. Definitely impressed with the ability for Magnus to shrug off perils on a 2+, as he does tend to kill himself in most of my games, just from casting all those powers. Some of the points decreases are pretty good. Access to plasma pistols is nice. Some of those stratagems look pretty tasty, and access to 3 sets of powers is exactly where Thousand Sons sorcerers should be. They are the master of the warp. They should have access to really cool powers, and that could really turn the tides of battle. And I'm looking forward to having a little play around with my old army list and seeing what changes have come about, and what cool things I can add based on this new information. And based on that, let me know in the comment section what you think of the Thousand Sons Codex. Is it better? Is it worse? What you expected? Have I missed anything? Just like I did with the Tzeentch Demon section. I hope I haven't. I hope I've picked all of the key high points here. And if you did, and if you enjoyed the video and you learned something new, let me know. And if you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and I shall catch you guys on the next video.
If you have a problem, if no one else can help, and if you can find them, maybe you can hire the A-Team.